Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy. And today's video is going to be about the Antichrist. Now I've had a script for the Antichrist in the works, or at least in my head, for a couple of years, few years. And I never got around to doing anything with it simply because it's a really deep subject and I don't think that the information should be presented without a prepared script with plenty of Bible verses and historic accounts. And I guess, that's one of those things that if I got into it, it would end up being years and years before you'd ever hear the information. And so for the time being, until I do get around to doing something like that, probably be just as good for me to get here in front of the camera and just tell you some of the basics. And that way we can all be on the same page. Now, first off, pretty much everything that everybody knows about the Antichrist is from the media. And by the media, I mean churches, TV, books, YouTube videos, things of that nature. And look, it's all right to admit that, because for many years that's the only information I had about the Antichrist, until I had read the Bible several times over and could see a pattern about an Antichrist. Basically everything I knew is what I had heard through the grapevine. And so you yourselves should be able to admit that everything you know about the Antichrist comes from similar sources. Today, we're not going to be going to chapter and verse and looking at everything about the Antichrist. We're just going to talk about a few basics, because I have been involved in religions that never said a thing about the Antichrist. I've been involved with religions that's all they talk about. And I have been involved with a religion that obsesses over trying to convince people that there is no such thing as an Antichrist. And their reasoning on that is the fact that the word Antichrist is never assigned to any particular individual. And that's the truth. If you go and look at the word Antichrist in the Bible, and you look at its origins in the original text, you'll find that there is not one single instance where that word is assigned to a unique individual. The word Antichrist comes from the Greek word antichristo, anti meaning against, Christo meaning chosen one, and it translates simply as against the chosen one, against the Christ. That chosen one, of course, we all know is Jesus. Jesus the Christ, the chosen one, the one who has been chosen to rule over God's kingdom. So an Antichrist linguistically could mean anyone that's against his taking over rulership, but in particular I think that the word antichristos simply means any political ruler chosen by man. Throughout all of human history, Satan has never once had a problem locating individuals willing to take a stand in support of his empire, his so-called civilization. The promise of democracy, or freedom to rule oneself, tricks many foolish individuals into joining Satan in his battle against God's kingdom. Our English language word democracy actually comes from the ancient Greek language word demokrateo. The ancient Greek language I'm speaking about is the same ancient Greek language that was used to write the original books of the New Testament. We are told that demokrateo means rulership by the crowds, but that's not exactly true. It's formed from two words, demo and krateo. Krateo meaning rulership, but the demo part is only a partial word. There are two words in the ancient Greek language that could be shortened to the form demo. Those words are demos and daemon. Demos means crowds of people, but daemon means the demons. I think it is very obvious that the word demos simply means humans that are ruled by the demons. When I was doing research about the ancient Greek word daemon, which we translate as demons, I found out that the word daemon is actually part of many other words in the ancient Greek language, all having to do in some way with demons. Those words, in many cases, had English equivalents, but none of those English equivalents are associated with demons. All are associated with self-rule, sovereignty, freedom, liberty. As an example, the word dominion, which means self-ruled realm, actually comes from the word daemonian, meaning ruling demon. People around the world, from all nations, proudly stand up and proclaim their freedom on a regular basis. There is no way that any human could possibly imagine that the way we live under civilization's oppressive rule could in any way be associated with the concept of freedom. When patriots around the world send their children off to die in Satan's bloodbaths, they are not doing so in order to defend their freedom. They are simply aligning themselves with Satan so that they can be free from God and his natural law. In any case, the word democracy can equally mean rule by the crowds or rule by the demons. In fact, any human ruler chosen by humans would be a champion for the cause of civilization. In this war between God's kingdom and Satan's empire, it would only be Jesus who has ever been chosen to rule over God's kingdom. By default, any ruler chosen by man would be in opposition to God's chosen ruler. Any ruler chosen to fight against God's kingdom would be considered an antichrist. I must admit that linguistically, the word Antichrist could be applied to anyone involved in this war, including those doing the choosing of those champions. But I am pretty sure that as used in the Bible, the word Antichrist would only apply to those political rulers that are chosen. The reason I'm telling you this is so you can have a good foundation for your belief in the fact that an Antichrist is going to make an appearance, because you don't want to base everything you know about the Antichrist on things that are found outside of the Bible. Your best friend, your family members, the churches, the networks don't know what they're talking about, or either they do know what they're talking about and they're just outright lying. You don't want to base your faith on any of that. If we're going to get an accurate understanding of the nature of the Antichrist, then we need to have at least a basic Bible-based understanding of the difference between humans and angels, and that's irregardless of whether we're talking about righteous angels or wicked angels. And a very good verse to start with, a key verse to understanding the relationship between humans and angels, is found at Genesis chapter 6 and verse 4. It comes up quite a bit. I'm sure you'll recognize it. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now, the very first word we're going to talk about is the word giant, because the real word that's found there is nephil. Nephil simply means fellers, as in the fellers, people who fell trees for a living. And the word giant is used in other verses in the Bible, and it's not translated from the word nephil. So when we're speaking about giants like Goliath, there is no connection between him and these giants mentioned in chapter 6 and verse 4 of Genesis. The word is nephil. It should be fellers, not giants. Now, the verse says that they were in the earth in those days and also after. And so a lot of religions that believe that the Nephilim somehow survived the flood will contact me and point to this verse and tell me that this is proof that the Nephilim are still here. Now, I've never disagreed with them, but I've always said, well, that verse really doesn't prove it. They may still be here, but not because of just that simple wording. The actual word used here, ekar, which is translated and also after that, simply means that they were giants then, or they were Nephilim then, and they were Nephilim afterwards. Well, the flood didn't happen for another 120 years, so if the flood killed the Nephilim, this verse could still be accurate when it says that there were Nephilim in the earth in those days and also afterwards. That would not prove that the Nephilim survived after the flood. However, when we get down to the bottom half of the verse, it says, they were born unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. This is a word that I've never looked into deeply. The word is olam. So I looked it up. I looked the word olam up, which is Strong's H, which stands for Hebrew, H 5769. And sure enough, it says that one of the definitions of that word is of ancient times. But that's a really rare thing. That's a really rare way for this word to be translated, because it's also translated as ever, everlasting, perpetual, evermore, always, time, more, and long. And see, in English, we have words that have multiple meanings, and sometimes the meanings don't have anything to do with each other. Oftentimes, the meanings are very, very closely related, but we don't have too many English words that mean opposites. I mean, here we are, we're translating this word as of the ancient past, but then we're also translating it as forever. How do we come to terms with these two conflicting ideas being encapsulated in the same word? Well, what I do whenever I come across something like this is I take that oddball definition and I go to every verse where it occurs and I try to see if the standard definition will work there. And sure enough, all of the verses that translate this as ancient past could work if the word was translated as forever, or perpetually, or in perpetuity. But if we take all of the places where the word is used to mean forever and we try to make the idea of the ancient past fit, it doesn't work. So I think, I'm pretty sure, reasonably certain, that this verse shouldn't say that they were the mighty men of old, but that they were the mighty men perpetually. So in perpetuity. And I don't believe that the angels are continuously reproducing offspring with men. I believe that when the flood came and killed off the Nephilim, that their spirits lived on. But as I said earlier, there is no unique individual spoken of anywhere in the Bible as the Antichrist. And what I mean by that is, unlike the word Christ, which is always preceded by a definite article, the word Antichrist is always preceded by an indefinite article. So whereas there are verses about a Antichrist and many Antichrists, there are no verses anywhere about the Antichrist. Christ, on the other hand, is always spoken of as the Christ. Now, where there might be a little confusion is in the difference between the Greek language and our modern English. In modern English, it's customary to leave the definite article off when speaking about something that would normally require a definite article. That's why we have the word Christ in our Bibles, whereas in the original Greek, it would say the Christ, because by tradition, when we speak of Christ, it's understood that we're speaking about the Christ. The exact opposite is true in Greek. There are verses in the Greek about Antichrist in the original Greek, but that's because the indefinite article was always understood in that language by tradition. So in our Bibles, there is absolutely no verse anywhere speaking of a unique individual as the Antichrist, unlike the many verses which speak of a unique individual called the Christ. Just because the word Antichrist is never used in the Bible to refer to a unique individual does not mean that it would be wrong for us to do so. After all, the concept of a unique individual taking a stand against the Christ in the last days is found throughout the Bible. In the book of 2 Thessalonians, he is spoken of as the man of lawlessness, or the man of iniquity, the son of perdition, or the son of destruction. This person is spoken of in multiple prophetic verses in regard to the last days. Linguistically, there would be no reason to believe that the word Antichrist cannot be used to describe a unique individual. After all, the word Christ obviously can be used to describe a unique individual. The word Antichrist can be used to speak of individuals who are not unique or groups of individuals who are not unique, but the word Christ can be used in the same way. Our Bible is in two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the Old Testament, the original books were recorded in Hebrew. No one in the ancient past was called the Christ or a Christ because Christ is a Greek word. It's only found in the New Testament. But the word Christ, which means chosen, also means anointed. In the ancient past, kings like Saul and David were anointed. In a ritual, someone poured oil over their heads. When Jesus was on the earth, he was anointed, but in a very unique way. The oil was poured on his feet. And in the ancient past, when all of those kings were anointed, they were always anointed by men. Jesus is the only person spoken of in the Bible as being anointed by a woman. Since this information is recorded in the Bible, it's important for us to understand why. In the ancient past, when kings were chosen to rule over the nation of Israel, it was God that did the choosing. God sent Samuel to anoint Saul as Israel's first king. Samuel was a man. When David was chosen to replace Saul, God sent Samuel again. God is always spoken of in the male gender. It was important that the king God chose be anointed by a man. However, Jesus was not sent to be some small-time political ruler. He was chosen to be the ruler of God's kingdom, in effect, the ruler of the entire earth. Since the Bible very clearly says that Satan is currently the ruler of the earth, then Jesus would not be sent here to replace the ruler of Israel. He would be here to replace Satan. Now, if we look back in the ancient past, it was not God who chose Satan to rule over the earth, but Eve. Eve was a woman. It is very appropriate that a woman actually performed the anointing for Jesus because it was a woman who initially chose to enter into the covenant relationship with our current world ruler, Satan. What I'm telling you isn't just speculation. It's a major theme of the Bible, and it runs all the way from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation, and we can confirm this by simply looking at the meaning of the names of all of the characters involved. Eve actually comes from the Hebrew word heve, meaning egg, because Eve was to become the mother of everybody alive on the earth. Now, another name that Eve is called by is Aishish. Aishish is formed from the ancient Hebrew word Aish. Aish means male tribal leader. Aishish means leader of the male tribal leader. Adam is often called Aish. Eve is often called Aishish. In the churches, this information is presented to make it seem as if Satan approached Eve because he knew she was the weaker of the two sexes and that he would have a better chance of fooling her than he would of fooling Adam. But the reality is, Satan approached Eve because Eve was the only one that had the legal right to enter into this covenant agreement. As the leader of the male tribal leaders, Satan did not want to waste his time going to Adam, because Adam could not enter into a covenant with Satan separate from his wife. It was his leader that had to make that decision. Another name that is very important to this story is Mary. Mary is the name of the woman that anointed Jesus. Mary, or Maria, is actually formed from the root word Miriam. Miriam was Moses' sister. Remember, it was Miriam who formed the rebellion against her brother Moses, and the word Miriam actually means the cause of the rebellion. When Mary anointed the feet of Jesus, she was not the only Mary that was in close association with Jesus. Jesus' mother was named Mary. Mary Magdalene, Jesus' very close friend, was named Mary. And theologians to this day argue over just how many Marys followed Jesus around. It is very important that we understand that since this rebellion was caused when Eve entered into the covenant agreement with Satan, women would have to be involved in order to get us out of this mess. And why Mary had to anoint Jesus' feet is also important. Remember, it was God who chose the kings of Israel. It was God who chose Jesus to be the ruler of his kingdom. The head is always associated with the heavenly realm. It's the feet that are always associated with the earthly realm. Jacob, whose name means usurper because he usurped the authority of his brother, actually means grabber of the heel, because when Jacob was being born, he was holding on to the heel of his older brother Esau. Anointing Jesus on his feet was a direct reference back to the original prophecy spoken in Genesis when God said, "He shall bruise you in the head and you shall bruise him in the heel." You're probably asking yourself, if Jesus has already been anointed as the king of God's kingdom, why has he as of yet not taken his position as ruler of the earth? And that's easy enough to answer by simply looking back on the story of Saul and David. When Saul was anointed as the king of the promised land, he immediately took over as king of the promised land. But later, when David was chosen to replace Saul, David was anointed and yet did not take over rulership because Saul immediately engaged in conflict with David, attempting to kill him in order to keep him from taking his place as king. Now, at the battle where Saul eventually died, his son Jonathan died as well. This is prophetic. When Satan is finally killed at the Battle of Armageddon, his sons, the Nephilim, all of those who are ruling the earth at that time, will die as well. And remember, right before Saul died, he went to the witch of Endor in order to bring Samuel up to tell him what to do, and Samuel told him, "You are going to die." When Christ returned, the Bible very clearly says that the dead are going to be resurrected, and those dead would include long dead prophet Samuel, who will once again come up from the grave in order to tell Satan that he is going to die. If we want to have an accurate understanding of the nature of the Antichrist, there are some very basic Bible principles that we need to understand first. Throughout the Bible, the theme of comparing humans to containers cannot be missed. When Jesus was on earth, he spoke to the religious leaders of his day about the importance of cleaning the inside of a cup. It's very obvious to anyone reading the account that Jesus was not speaking about cups. He was speaking about those religious leaders when he told them the inside of the cup needs to be cleaned before you worry about the outside of the cup. He was very obviously telling the religious leaders of his day that irregardless of how good they looked on the outside, what was important was what they were on the inside. When asked about a man that Jesus had freed from an unclean spirit, Jesus explained that there would be very little benefit to freeing the man of the unclean spirit if that man did not fill that void with a clean spirit. Now, what we can learn from this is that a man can be filled with a clean spirit or an unclean spirit, and in fact, speaking of the man as not refilling the void indicates that a man can be filled with no spirit at all. In the book of Judges, we are told that Jephthah surrounded himself with empty men. Now, in our English Bibles, it often says that Jephthah surrounded himself with vain men or foolish men. But this is the only verse that uses that word that translates it in this way. Every other verse using that word translates it as empty. It is the same word used to describe vessels that have no contents. As the information is presented in this passage, it's very obvious that these spiritually empty men were willing to follow Jephthah because they could perceive that he was not spiritually empty. Those who are spiritually empty will often attach themselves to something that they perceive as greater than themselves. And at the time, Jephthah's army was probably the greatest thing available to them. Understanding that humans can be filled with a wicked spirit, or filled with a righteous spirit, or in fact filled with no spirit at all, we can conclude that the spirits themselves can live within humans or exist alive outside of humans. In fact, there are verses that indicate that the spirits can live within other animals as well. These men of renown, these famous people of the past, were able to convince the vast majority of humanity to follow them, believing that they were ruling themselves when in fact they were being ruled by demons. When the Antichrist makes his appearance, there can be no doubt that human beings who crave self-rulership will be fooled into following Satan off to his destruction. When civilization dies, Satan's followers will die as well. Now that we have a good basic understanding of all the different kinds of people that have participated in the war between God's kingdom and Satan's empire throughout the centuries, we can get a better understanding of just what kind of person might be the Antichrist. First off, we spoke about the people that were considered empty. These people are also referred to as spiritually dead. They often have a tendency to attach themselves to artificial entities such as political parties, sports teams, nations, religions, and other such foolish things that human beings use as a means of dividing themselves up for warfare. It's as if they're looking to attach themselves to something greater than themselves, but they absolutely refuse to attach themselves to the Holy Spirit. Such people have proven on many occasions that they are willing to make sacrifices up to and including sacrificing their own lives in defense of Satan's civilization. However, there is really no reason for us to imagine that such a person could ever rise to the position of actually becoming the Antichrist. Another kind of person that we spoke of is someone who is not empty but full. Such a person could be filled with a clean spirit, but there's really no reason for us to discuss whether such a person might perhaps be the Antichrist. The other kind of person that's full would be someone filled with an unclean spirit. In the ancient past, these people were called Nephilim. When Jesus was alive, he made a direct reference to such people when he accused the religious leaders of his day of being the offspring of vipers. The Bible does not specifically spell out exactly how that all took place. We don't really understand exactly how the Nephilim came about, and we don't really understand how demon possession comes about. We know it exists. We know that Jesus compared the religious leaders of his day to those Nephilim of the past, but other than that, we really don't know. When we read the original accounts, it sounds like something's different, but maybe they're not different at all. If the circumstances surrounding the birth of the Nephilim sounds very similar to the circumstances surrounding the birth of Jesus, it's because it is. Just as those spirit entities from the past entered into the daughters of men to create the Nephilim, the Holy Spirit entered into Mary in order to bring about the birth of Jesus. Obviously, I don't think it's inappropriate to compare the birth of Christ to the birth of the Nephilim. However, in doing so, I think it's imperative to explain something about Jesus that makes him unique. In the Bible, he's called the only begotten Son of God. In the ancient past, when the Nephilim were created, it kind of seems like these were spirit beings in fleshly bodies. Now, the people that Jesus addressed in his day were more like human beings possessed by an unclean spirit. Jesus Christ is never spoken of in any way that would lead us to believe that he was a fleshly human being that was possessed by a righteous angel or a clean spirit or anything of that nature. Jesus Christ is always spoken of as the Son of God in the flesh. Now, since we know that the Bible is a written record of the war between creation and civilization, the war between the righteous angels and the wicked angels, the war between God's kingdom and Satan's empire, then very obviously this war could be described as the war between Jesus and Satan. That being the case, we can expect that although it is possible that the Antichrist will simply be a man possessed by Satan, It is also very likely that just as Jesus Christ was the Son of God in the flesh, that the Antichrist will be Satan in the flesh. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.